Thank you, Pat. So can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. I can't tell you how honored I am to be a part of this group today. It's just amazing for me to look out here in 2022 and see the number of teachers, because Deborah and I started with the two of us, and then we hired 3 more people, and that was the staff in 1975. So as Pat said, I'm here to talk about the history, the present, and the future. So I think I will start with the history because that makes most sense. I did spend 10 years as a teacher here. I actually started across the street at the Concord Academy. So I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So I taught with Diane Krug in the 4s class for a few years, starting. Diane, what year did you come? 76, maybe? Pretty early. And then I also taught the after-school class because in 1975 there was no after-school care either. So I taught the after-school class until the town of Concord took it over. And as Pat said, after 10 years, I went back to public school where I'd started in Lexington and taught kindergarten there for 26 years. So when I started the center, I was a young mother of a toddler, a little girl. And today, I'm obviously a retired grandmother, teacher. I have 5 adult children, and I have 5 grandchildren. So time does fly. It's a cliche, but it is true. And I'm so happy to be sharing this time with you today. I think it's important that we know our history, because if you don't know your history, you don't know who you are and where you're going. So I'm thrilled that I can tell you a little bit more about the center, especially because women's history is often written out of it's not even written, it's often left out of the history books. And this really is a story about the power and the energy of women. And of course, we didn't do it alone. We had a lot of help from the community and a lot of help from men and fathers and business people. But primarily, this is a story about women. I'm also here to remind you that you are the heart, the soul, and the center in the Concord Children's Center. That without you, the center does not exist. We have buildings, we have programs, we have curriculum, we have all of that, but without you and your energy and your commitment and your dedication, there is no Concord Children's Center. So I want to thank you for that. You're really educating the next generation of children, and that generation is going to be facing quite a few difficult decisions. So it's really important. The job that you do is vital, not only to the parents and the children and the community, but to the world. So back to the history. As I said, I started across the street. In the spring of 1975, I was teaching high school at Concord Academy, teaching child development. And I had a daughter, and I had no daycare for her. So what I did was I hired students, because this is a boarding school. And the students would come babysit my daughter Erin when I taught. Well, there would be times that they didn't show up for whatever reason. They were sick, they overslept, whatever it was. And then I had to take my daughter with me to my classroom, which wasn't so bad because I was teaching child development, so it was okay. But obviously, that's not a very good solution to daycare. So I decided right then I was going to start a daycare center for the faculty at Concord Academy. Well, if you look across the street, there are lots of old buildings and not really much of a place to put a new building. So we couldn't find any space. So it quickly became clear to me that I had to find a space and a partner. Well, Deborah Begner had just moved to town. She had come here from New York City. She went to the Bank Street School of Education. By this point in her life, she had 2 after-school children, Allison and Stephen, and she luckily had started a daycare center in New York. So she knew how to do it. So we got together and we said, we're going to do this. So she shared my vision of looking for reliable daycare and providing reliable daycare, but we were really inspired by several social movements, actually 3 social movements of the time. You know, 1975 was a long time ago, and as Pat said, early childhood education wasn't really much of a thing back then. It was preschool and it was really considered glorified babysitting. But there was a growing awareness in the late 60s and early 70s that the early years were the most important years in human development, that what happens to us in early childhood affects the rest of our lives, emotionally, socially, and cognitively. There was also an awareness that play was how children learn, that children learn by doing. And I saw this in my own child. I had been teaching middle school and high school, and after I had a child, I became fascinated with the process of learning. And those of you who are parents will know how exciting it is when your child learns a new skill. So I decided to go back and get a degree in early childhood. At the same time, I was planning the Concord Children's Center. I don't know what I was thinking, but I did it. And my dream became to open up a school. Excuse me. I'm not used to talking so much now that I'm retired. I used to talk all day long, so I really wanted to open up a high-quality daycare center with Deborah. So yes, early childhood education came at just the right time for Deborah and I. The second social movement that inspired us was the peace movement. In the spring of 1975, the Vietnam War finally ended, if you can imagine. For you, it feels like ancient history. For Deborah and I, it was a contemporary event with the fall of Saigon in the spring of 1975. Part of the reason why the war ended when it did was because of young people. Young people protested. Young people started a peace movement. Young people believed in Gandhi's expression. What was his? Oh, what I meant to say was not his expression, but his whole philosophy of nonviolence. How do we end a war? Nonviolently. And there was another expression, which was think globally, act locally. So when I heard that, I thought, okay, I'm a teacher. How can I think globally and act locally? Well, I think what I can do is bring peace into the early childhood setting. And I was also inspired by Gandhi's statement, which said, if we are to reach real peace in this world, we shall have to begin with the children. So I decided to make that part of our curriculum as well. Not only play, but also social and emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. The third movement that influenced Deborah and I was the women's movement. And in the 1960s, it was actually the third wave of the women's movement. The women's movement started in the 1850s with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and other women who got together in Seneca Falls, New York, and had a Declaration of Rights for Women. I don't know if you probably read that in the history books. That's one thing that was in the history books about women. And then again in the 1920s, the women's suffragette movement, when women finally got the vote. And again in the 1960s, when more and more mothers were going back to work and there was no daycare, no national policy of daycare in this country. So in a town like Concord, it was only appropriate. Daycare was actually a radical concept, which is why we called ourselves the Concord Children's Center and not the Concord Daycare Center, because God forbid there should be daycare in Concord. It was a radical idea too, because it challenged the two prevailing beliefs about women and their role in society. Women's basic job was, guess what? Taking care of children. And you can see that's still prevalent when you look around this room and you consider who goes into early childhood education, predominantly women. So it was women's primary responsibility to take care of children. And in fact, when I had taught in Arlington, I taught public school, and it was written into my teacher's contract that when I got pregnant, I had to resign. Believe it or not. And that was in 1973. The second concept was that childcare was an individual responsibility, that it was up to the mother of that child to figure out how to take care of her child. Well, the women's movement challenged both of those beliefs, and it highlighted the idea that Childcare is a social issue, and it's about equal rights, and it's about government responsibility to families. So European countries, every European country in 1975 had childcare policies where they either subsidized childcare or they offered free childcare. Unfortunately, the United States was not one of those countries then, and it's still not today. Although now, thanks to Elizabeth Warren, childcare has once again become a national issue. When she ran for president, I don't know if you listened to her, but she talked about finding childcare for her daughter and how if she had no childcare, she would not have become a lawyer and she would not be where she was today. So she made that her signature issue. And she talked to Biden, obviously, Joe Biden, about it. And it is part of the American Families Plan that just passed both houses of Congress. So it's a start. It includes provisions for making childcare more affordable because, as you know, it's an expensive thing to do, provide childcare for everybody. And also the other aspect in the bill is about making childcare workers' salaries more competitive. So if those two things happen, it would be nice. We still don't have a comprehensive social program, but this is a good beginning. Last year, Jill Biden and Kate Middleton released a statement together, and they reminded us, and I quote, "There are few issues more worthy of our attention than the transformative power of early childhood care and education for our communities and our nations." In 2020, the last year the figures are available, 81% of mothers with children ages 6 to 17 and 77% of mothers with children under the age of 6 worked full-time. So it's obvious to anyone that childcare is an integral part of any social and economic policy. Because without childcare, adequate, reliable, affordable childcare, families cannot function. Families are healthier and they're more economically stable when they have access to childcare. So that's my little I don't know, soapbox, I guess. Putting childcare in perspective here. But back to the beginning, back to Deborah and I. So Deborah and I kept these lessons of the social movements that influenced us in our hearts and our minds, but our pocketbooks were empty. So we decided to go to the local bank right down the street here and talk to the loan officer. We went with great anticipation and enthusiasm to get a business loan. And he looked at us and he said, "No." And we said, "Why?" And he said, "You don't have any collateral." Well, we weren't going to let that stop us, no collateral. So we immediately went to the community and said, "We need support." And we found human collateral was just as important as financial collateral. So the community really rallied around the two of us. They didn't know who we were. We didn't have any money. They had to put their trust in us, and they did. The Concord Public Schools gave us 3 classrooms in the Harvey Wheeler building, which had just luckily closed. And they said, "Pay the rent at the end of the month." And they offered us reduced rent. The Alcott School had just bought new furniture for their kindergarten classrooms. They gave us all their old tables and chairs. I don't know if we still have them, but... Two very important men in West Concord, Mr. Phillips of Phillips Hardware and Mr. Forbes of the West Concord 5 and 10, stepped up and generously offered us a line of credit. This is before credit cards, before women could have credit cards, by the way. They gave us a line of credit so we could buy, well, you know what you can buy at the West Concord 5 and 10, anything you ever wanted. So between the 5 and 10 and the hardware store, we got everything we needed, and the Concord Public Schools. Circle Furniture in Cambridge, which is now also in Acton, sold us their unfinished bookcases at a reduced rate. Deborah and I would go into Cambridge, put them in the back of our station wagons, drive them out here, went to Phillips Hardware, picked up what we called Concord Children's Center Blue paint, and Deborah and I painted those bookcases. I don't know if they're still around. Diane, do you still have them? Mrs. Smith, who was the children's librarian at the Fowler Library, said, come in, take as many books as you want for as long as you want. Several families in the area donated their energy, their time, and their materials to build us a sandbox, a house corner, and a loft. And I don't know if that loft is still around either. Whether or not it's legal to have a loft, I don't even know.
We do have
So that September of 1975, we greeted our first class of 15 3- and 4-year-olds and an after-school class of 10. Their parents did take a leap of faith and trusted their children to us. So we had just enough income from tuition to cover salaries, supplies, and rent. But each year our program expanded. And in 1981, because of the growing demand for childcare, we opened up our second location at Ripley. And that's when I made one of the best decisions of my life, and I hired Penny to take care of the after-school children who came over from the various elementary schools. In 1986, we opened up a center across the street from Emerson Hospital for infants and toddlers. And in 2001, thanks to Kathy Redeker, former director, and others who helped her, the center raised $1 million to build the Children's Center, which is now on Main Street in West Concord, on the former Harvey Wheeler playground. That building was designed by a former parent, Michael Rosenfeld, and his partner, Andrew Goldstein, who also sent his children to the Children's Center and has 2 grandsons at the Children's Center. Or are they through yet? I don't know. But
no, they're at Gerzon.
They're what?
They're at Gerzon.
Oh, okay. Anyway, Andrew Goldstein was a former parent. He also was involved. So what I'm saying is that we got so much support from so many people in the community. In 2012, Penny had her own vision of a natural playscape for all ages and abilities. Was that in 2012, I think, around 2012? Yeah.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
And Jennifer Brooke, who was another parent, was a landscape architect, and she was assisted by another parent, Joan Ferguson, and a Concord naturalist named Cherry Corey. They designed the playground, and this multi-year project was managed by a group of volunteers, including another parent, Edith Hetling, who coordinated the fundraising, and they raised $338,000. I don't know if maybe more by now. Thanks to many people in this community who had no connection to the Concord Children's Center, but believed that we really needed a playground that would serve all ages and abilities. In 2020, as you probably know, the Concord Children's Center bought a beautiful historic farmhouse abutting conservation land on Old Bedford Road, not far from where Henry grew up, and not far from the Ripley Center. And that will include 7,000 square feet and 6 classrooms and a community space. So that will consolidate the Emerson and the Ripley buildings and the programs. So there will be 2 rather than 3 sites. But as I said, the Concord Children's Center is much more than buildings and projects. It's a community of teachers, parents, children, alumni, business people, and residents who've built strong bonds over the years. And it's also a place where people build strong connections between families and between teachers and families. I myself was part of a book club for 25 years, and we started out with our children in preschool. And it was a wonderful experience just to be with a group of women once a month for 25 years. We started talking about preschool, and we ended up talking about graduate schools and marriages and all sorts of things. So it was a great support group. The other thing that happened to me was I met my future husband at the Ripley site, and he's here today and he's filming. Hi, Robert. So say hi to Robert, everybody. He was looking for childcare as a single father for his 4-year-old daughter. Lucky me. Aren't a lot of single men that walk through my front door when I need them, but he was there. There are teachers at the center who've been here for a long time. I'd like to just say a few names. I know I'm going to miss some people, but Diane and Penny, Anne, Joanne, Lynn St. Germain, Kai Shaner, Denise, Mary Heinsohn Rowe, many, many others. I don't remember all their names. They've devoted their lives and their careers, their teaching careers, to making sure the center is a place that maintains the vision that we had back in 1975. Well, the world has changed a lot since 1975, as you know. Technology has changed the way we do business, interact with each other, and entertain ourselves. It has even changed the way children play. I don't know if you've noticed, but it has. So, you remember this book, I'm sure, Goodnight Moon. I'd just like to read a little bit of it to show you what the world was like. This was actually written in the 1940s, but it's relevant still today, and I'm sure that many of you read it to your children that you have and in your classrooms as well. Goodnight Moon. I'm only going to read a little part of it. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of the cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting in chairs, and 2 little kittens, and a pair of mittens, and a little toy house, and a young mouse, and a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush, and a little old lady who was whispering, "Hush." You know the rest of the story. Here's a parody of Goodnight Moon. This one is called Goodnight iPad, talking about technology and its effect on children's play. This book was written in 2011, and you can see it is dated as well in a different way. Oh, and the author of this book is Android. In the bright, buzzing room, there was an iPad and a kid playing Doom and a screensaver of a bird launching over the moon. There were 3 little nooks with 10,000 books and a huge LCD, Wi-Fi HD TV with Bose 5.1, 6 remotes, and a 3D. And a BlackBerry ringing with Eminem singing. See, a little dated there? And a new Facebook friend and texts without end. And a viral clip of a cat doing flips. And the bings and the bongs and the beeps of emails and tweets. And a fed-up old woman who was trying to sleep. The point is that children now spend more time than ever with technology, more time with the virtual world than the real world. They often play with toys that are connected to the media, and those toys dictate how they play, and they limit the kids' creativity. Screens are everywhere, and the average elementary school child spends between 4 and 6 hours a day with a screen. So we know, based on the research that people have done, that excessive screen time increases children's health issues like obesity, like irregular sleep, cognitive, emotional, and social issues, because they are not interacting with real live human beings, they're interacting with a screen. Screen time interrupts and robs them of their time for their own imaginative play, because they often will imitate what they see on the screen rather than making up their own stories. And I started out saying you have to know your story to know who you are. Children have to know their stories to know who they are, and that's why it's important that they engage in imaginative play so they make up their own stories. Now, I have a 12-year-old granddaughter, and she came to our house a couple of weeks ago with her friends to play. And there were 3 or 4 of them playing in the pool, and I overheard them calling each other Kim, Chloe, and Kylie. And I said to my granddaughter, whose name is Kira, I said, "Kira, what are you playing?" And she said, "We're playing the Kardashians." It got to me. It did get to me. So all I'm saying is we are teaching a group of children that are surrounded and living in a sea of technology and media. So when you're teaching them, keep that in mind, that you're competing with all of that, and it's a good idea to limit screen time whenever possible. What hasn't changed in all these years are the values that the Concord Children's Center promotes. And they've continued to be at the heart of who I am as a teacher and as a parent. And one of the things I learned is one of the most important things you can do is have a trusting partnership with the parents of the children that are in your care. And I learned that I'm not the expert imparting advice to parents, that my job really is to listen and understand their point of view before I offer any help to them. And that the most important thing that I can do for those parents is to tell them how much I enjoy being with their children every day. How I talk to children matters too, because children during these early years are building language acquisition, and they imitate everything that you do and everything that you say. And I remember one time when I was teaching at Ripley, I had a little girl named Jenny, and she was playing with her friend Maddie. And she was walking around the room, going to different centers, and she would say to Maddie, "Maddie, for Christ's sake, let's go play in the sandbox. Maddie, for Christ's sake, let's go paint a painting." And she didn't know what she was saying, but she was obviously imitating what she had heard at home. Well, when I told her parents, they were mortified, just mortified. So the reason I use that vivid example is to remind you that they will listen to everything you say. So make sure you're using, I don't want to say proper language, but because of the language acquisition, speaking in complete sentences, using descriptive words, all of that helps them build their vocabulary, and then they will imitate that. I also learned that how you arrange your classroom, your schedule, and your materials can influence how your children play. Children love ritual. So when you have a schedule every day, which I know we do at the Concord Children's Center, it helps them get to know the materials. And the best kinds of materials are those classic ones that we all have in our classrooms, like puzzles and blocks and outside balls and trikes, paint, art supplies. And I learned that less is often more, that a well-stocked classroom doesn't mean that you need to fill every single shelf. In fact, that can be overwhelming for children, especially children who are getting overwhelmed sensorially with the media, that less can be more. So keep that in mind. I also learned one of the most important things is creating a sense of community in your classroom based on trust. For many children, this is their first sense of community away from their families, and they will not learn anything unless they feel safe. So part of creating a schedule is creating that sense of safety, that they know what comes next in the world, and that they begin to experience being a member of the community. Now, there are two aspects of being a member of a community. One is you have rights in this community, and the other is you have responsibilities in the community. So having the kids do simple things like pushing in their chairs, putting their lunch boxes away, those are responsibilities that they have. And one of the things that normally happens in every classroom, in every interaction that we have with each other, is conflict. And I learned that conflict is a natural and normal part of life. So I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time in my classroom helping children solving conflicts. So I wanted to show you how I did that today briefly. And before I read my next story, I'm going to read a story out of here by Dr. Seuss. It's called The Zacks. Some of you might know it. What I'd like you to do is take your papers, fold them in half, and draw a rectangle on the top half of your paper.